You don't need permission to enter a place you already belong to. The words hadn't even been spoken yet, but they hung in the air like a warning no one in the lobby of the Meridian Tower could quite explain. It was 9:14 a.m. in downtown Chicago, and the glass doors reflected a city moving too fast to care about what happened inside one building. Alicia Carter stepped forward with a calm that didn't announce itself, didn't ask for attention, and didn't need validation. She wore a simple dark coat, tailored but unbranded, her presence quiet enough that most people wouldn't look twice. That was always the point. To the security guard at the front desk, Mark Reynolds, she looked like any other visitor trying to get past a system designed to filter out inconvenience. He lifted his hand slightly without looking up from his screen. "Stop right there," he said, his tone flat, practiced, familiar. Alicia paused, not because she was uncertain, but because she was observing. The lobby behind him was polished marble, the kind that reflected confidence it didn't always deserve. A few guests lingered near the elevators, glancing over with the mild curiosity of people who assumed this was routine. Mark finally looked up, scanning her once, then twice, as if expecting her appearance to change into something more acceptable. "You don't have clearance for executive entry," he added, louder this time, enough for others to hear. Alicia didn't respond immediately. Silence, in her world, wasn't absence. It was measurement. Across the desk, a young receptionist named Emily Parker shifted uncomfortably. Something about the name in the system earlier that morning had stayed in her mind, a detail she hadn't been able to dismiss. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, watching the interaction unfold like a line she wasn't supposed to cross. Mark leaned slightly closer to the security panel, pressing a button that would alert building management. "We may have an unauthorized visitor," he said into the line, his voice steady, almost rehearsed for situations like this. Alicia's eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the angles, the exits, the cameras she didn't acknowledge and didn't need to fear. "Ma'am," Mark continued, now stepping from behind the desk, "I'm going to need you to step outside and resolve this at the front verification office." His words carried the certainty of someone who had never questioned whether certainty could be wrong. A guest near the seating area lifted a phone subtly, not yet recording, just anticipating. Emily's hand finally dropped from the keyboard. She had seen it. The designation. Not visitor. Not contractor. Owner-level access, pending confirmation. Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Alicia finally spoke, her voice low, even, almost conversational. "Before you escalate this further, you might want to confirm what system you're looking at." Mark gave a short, dismissive breath. "I don't need to confirm anything. I know who belongs in this building." That sentence settled into the room heavier than expected. Alicia didn't move. She didn't argue. She simply let the silence stretch just long enough for doubt to begin forming in places certainty usually lived. Emily took a step forward, then stopped. The system screen in front of her refreshed automatically, a routine update she had seen 100 times before. But this time, something different appeared in the header, a designation that made her stomach tighten. Building owner authorization active. Her eyes flicked toward Alicia again, slower this time, recalculating everything she thought she understood. Mark noticed her expression. "What is it?" he asked sharply. Emily hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think the system is showing something you should see." Alicia finally turned her gaze directly toward Mark, not with anger, not with challenge, but with the kind of stillness that made assumptions feel suddenly expensive. And in that moment, before anyone had the chance to understand what was shifting beneath them, the lobby stopped feeling like a checkpoint and started feeling like a mistake waiting to be corrected. The air in the Meridian Tower lobby shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible at first, like the moment before a storm becomes visible on the horizon. Emily Parker stared at the screen again, her eyes scanning the same line of text that refused to disappear. Building owner authorization active. It did not make sense in the context of what Mark Reynolds was saying, and yet the system was not something that made mistakes easily. Mark noticed her hesitation and stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening his tone. "Emily, I said what is going on with the system," he demanded. Emily swallowed, her fingers trembling slightly above the keyboard. "It is showing a level of access I have never seen before," she said carefully, choosing each word as if it could change the outcome of what was already unfolding. Mark gave a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head. That is not possible. The building owner does not just walk in without coordination. There are protocols. His confidence filled the space, but it no longer filled it completely. Behind them, Alicia Carter remained still, her posture unchanged, her attention not on Mark, but on the flow of people in the lobby who were now beginning to slow their movements. A man near the seating area had fully raised his phone, no longer pretending not to record. Another guest whispered something under their breath, but the words were lost in the rising tension. Emily finally spoke again, her voice quieter now, but more certain. The authorization is tied to the primary ownership account of this building. It is not a guest profile. Mark turned toward her sharply. Then it must be an error, he said quickly, reaching for the security radio clipped to his shoulder. He pressed the button. This is front lobby security. We have a situation requiring building director confirmation immediately. His words were firm, but there was a slight edge now that had not been there before. Alicia finally moved for the first time since the exchange began, not stepping forward, not stepping back, but simply turning her head slightly, as if acknowledging that the situation had reached a predictable stage. Her voice remained calm when she spoke. You are escalating a system you do not fully understand, she said. Mark stiffened at the words. I understand this building perfectly, he replied. And I know exactly who is authorized to be here. Emily hesitated again, then turned the monitor slightly so Mark could see the confirmation header more clearly. The text remained unchanged. Mark stared at it for a moment longer than he intended to, then straightened abruptly, as if rejecting what he had just seen. We will verify this with the building director, he said firmly. As if summoned by the statement itself, the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened with a soft chime. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his presence immediately changing the posture of everyone nearby. Thomas Whitmore, the building director, scanned the lobby quickly before locking his attention onto Mark. What is going on? He asked, his tone controlled but alert. Mark moved quickly to meet him halfway. We have an individual in the lobby claiming unauthorized access is showing in the system, but we believe it is a discrepancy, he explained. Thomas Whitmore looked toward the front desk, then toward Emily, and finally toward Alicia. His expression changed subtly, not into alarm, but into recognition that had not yet fully formed into certainty. Emily took a small step back from the terminal, as if distancing herself from the responsibility of what the screen was showing. Alicia met the building director's gaze for the first time directly, and the silence between them carried more weight than anything that had been said aloud. The lobby, once routine and controlled, now felt like it was waiting for one final confirmation that would decide which version of reality would remain. Thomas Whitmore stood in the center of the Meridian Tower lobby, as if the floor beneath him had subtly changed its meaning. His eyes moved from Mark Reynolds to Emily Parker and then finally settled on Alicia Carter. For a brief moment, he did not speak, and that silence carried the weight of someone trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they believed should be possible. Mark stepped in quickly, trying to reclaim control of the situation. Sir, there appears to be a system discrepancy regarding an unauthorized access flag, he said, his voice firm but slightly faster than before. Thomas did not respond immediately. Instead, he extended his hand toward Emily. Show me the terminal, he said calmly. Emily hesitated, then turned the screen fully toward him. The words were still there, unchanged. Building owner authorization active. Thomas leaned in closer, his expression tightening in subtle stages as he read it again and again, as if repetition might introduce doubt into the system itself. Behind them, Alicia remained still, her presence steady, neither advancing nor retreating. A guest near the seating area shifted slightly, continuing to record, while another lowered their phone, uncertain whether they were witnessing something routine or irreversible. Mark spoke again, more insistently now. This could be a spoofed credential or a delayed sync error from the central database, he said. Emily shook her head slightly, almost reflexively. The authentication timestamp is live, she replied. It is updating in real time from the executive control layer. That sentence changed the temperature of the room more than any raised voice could have. Thomas straightened slowly. Executive control layer, he repeated under his breath, as if confirming the phrase had the correct weight. He finally turned fully toward Alicia. May I confirm your identity for verification purposes? He asked carefully. Alicia met his gaze without hesitation. "You may," she said simply. Mark exhaled sharply, as though the question itself was unnecessary. "This is wasting time," he muttered. "We are going to need building security escalation if this continues." But Thomas raised one hand slightly, not in agreement, but in restraint. "No escalation yet," he said. The lobby seemed to tighten around that decision. Emily's fingers moved quickly now, pulling up deeper system layers that were normally restricted. As she navigated, additional fields populated the screen. Ownership registry confirmed. Primary authorization linked to Alicia Carter. Full access tier validated. Emily froze for a second longer than anyone noticed. "It is confirming it," she said quietly. Mark turned toward her sharply. "Confirming what exactly?" he demanded. Emily hesitated, then spoke more carefully. "She is registered as the principal owner of Meridian Tower Holdings." The words did not land immediately. It took a moment for the meaning to travel through the space and settle into the people inside it. A guest near the elevator lowered their phone completely now. Daniel Brooks, who had been quietly observing from the seating area, leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Thomas Whitmore stepped back half a pace, as if distance might help him process the information more clearly. "That cannot be correct without executive transition notification," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Emily quickly responded. "The transition was logged 3 weeks ago, but the access layer was only activated today at 9:02 hours. Mark looked between them, his confidence beginning to fracture in small, visible ways. Alicia finally spoke again, her voice still measured but carrying a quiet certainty that did not require validation. "You were notified," she said. "You just did not expect to see me here like this." The words did not accuse. They simply completed a missing piece of the room's understanding. And for the first time since the interaction began, Thomas Whitmore did not respond immediately, because the system in front of him was no longer something to question. It was something to accept. The moment Alicia Carter's statement settled into the Meridian Tower lobby, the atmosphere shifted from uncertainty into something far more irreversible. It was no longer a question of access or system verification. It was a question of recognition. Thomas Whitmore stood motionless for a brief second longer than comfort allowed, his eyes fixed on the confirmation displayed across Emily Parker's terminal. Mark Reynolds, however, reacted first, shaking his head as if trying to physically dismiss what he had just heard. "That is not possible," he said quickly. "We would have received formal executive notice through corporate channels." Emily's voice was careful, almost hesitant, but steady enough to cut through his denial. "The executive notice was distributed through internal governance 3 weeks ago. It was flagged as read by building administration." That sentence created a silence that felt heavier than the marble beneath their feet. Thomas slowly turned his head toward Mark. "Did you acknowledge the transition notice?" he asked. Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "I oversee security operations, not ownership transfers," he replied defensively. Alicia finally took a single step forward, not rushed, not hesitant, simply deliberate. "That is where the misunderstanding began," she said. "You treated visibility as identity. You assumed access defines belonging." Her voice carried evenly across the lobby, not raised, not forceful, but impossible to ignore. A guest near the elevators had now fully lowered their phone, unsure whether continuing to record was still appropriate or already irrelevant. Daniel Brooks stood slowly from the seating area, his expression no longer curious but visibly unsettled. "Are you saying she actually owns this building?" he asked, more to Thomas than anyone else. Thomas did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked back at Emily's screen again, as if hoping the system might contradict itself under pressure. It did not. The authorization line remained active, unchanged, confirmed, and time-stamped. Emily swallowed before speaking again. "Primary ownership control is not only active," she said quietly. "It is currently the highest priority access tier in the system." Mark stepped back slightly from the desk for the first time since the interaction began. "There has to be context missing here," he insisted, though his tone had begun to lose its certainty. Alicia turned her attention toward him directly now. "There is no missing context," she said. "There is only delayed recognition." Thomas exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance as if recalibrating his role in real time. "If this is accurate," he said carefully. Then all executive authorization flows through you. Alicia nodded once. It does. The word landed without emphasis, but it changed everything. The lobby, once a controlled checkpoint of procedures and assumptions, now felt like a space waiting for instruction from a different source entirely. Emily's hands remained on the keyboard, but she no longer typed. She was simply observing the cascade of confirmations that had already completed without her intervention. Mark looked around the room as if searching for someone who would agree with his original version of events, but no one did. Even the guests who had initially appeared indifferent now watched in silence, their attention no longer casual, but fully engaged. Thomas finally spoke again, his voice lower than before. "What are your instructions?" he asked. It was not a challenge. It was a shift. Alicia paused, allowing the question to settle into its proper weight. "First," she said, "you stop treating presence as suspicion. Second, you restore every access decision made in the last hour for review under executive authority." Her words were precise, measured, and final in tone. Mark opened his mouth as if to respond, but no sound followed. For the first time since he had stepped into his role that morning, he was no longer in control of the definition of the situation. Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing the reality as it restructured itself around him. And in that quiet, the Meridian Tower lobby was no longer a place of enforcement. It had become a place of correction. The silence inside the Meridian Tower lobby did not break immediately. It settled first, like dust after a sudden shift in air pressure, and only then did it begin to reveal what had changed. Mark Reynolds stood near the security desk without speaking, his posture no longer firm, but uncertain in a way he did not fully recognize in himself. Thomas Whitmore remained still, processing Alicia Carter's instruction not as a request, but as a structural directive that the building itself now had to follow. Emily Parker kept her eyes on the terminal, watching as system layers updated in real time. Access logs began rewriting themselves under executive authorization, not to erase history, but to reclassify it under a higher governance level. Alicia did not move. She did not need to. Her presence had shifted from being questioned to being integrated into the environment itself. A guest near the elevator finally lowered their phone completely, no longer recording, as if the act itself now felt irrelevant to what was unfolding. Another guest quietly stepped away from the seating area, creating distance not out of fear, but out of uncertainty about where to stand when authority changes shape in real time. Thomas finally broke the silence. "All prior access decisions from the last 60 minutes are being flagged for executive review," he confirmed, his voice more procedural now, as if anchoring himself in protocol could stabilize what instinct could not. Alicia gave a slight nod. "Good," she said. "Begin with security escalation triggers and entry denial incidents." Mark shifted slightly, finally speaking again, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Those were standard security checks based on visual verification protocols," he said, almost as if repeating instructions he had always believed to be unquestionable. Alicia turned her attention toward him. "That is exactly what will be reviewed," she replied calmly. There was no anger in her tone, only finality. Emily's screen refreshed again, pulling up layered audit trails. Her eyes widened slightly as she read through entries that were now being reclassified under ownership override protocols. "The system is reprocessing all flagged interactions," she said quietly. Thomas looked toward her. "How long until full synchronization?" he asked. Emily checked the timestamp. "Less than 5 minutes," she replied. Mark let out a slow breath, stepping back a fraction as if the physical space around him had changed meaning. "So what happens to us?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could fully filter it. Alicia finally looked at him directly again. "That depends on documentation," she said. "Not assumption." The distinction lingered in the air longer than the sentence itself. Daniel Brooks, still standing near the seating area, spoke carefully. "I have seen security misunderstand situations before," he said, choosing his words slowly. "But I have never seen a system override an entire chain of command in real time." Alicia turned her gaze briefly toward him. "Then you are seeing what happens when ownership and perception finally align," she said. Emily's fingers moved again, pulling up a deeper audit layer that had just become accessible. A new line appeared at the top of the log, executive presence verified on site. She looked up instinctively. It is now fully synchronized, she said. Thomas nodded once, absorbing the confirmation. Then the building is under active executive oversight, he said. Alicia corrected him gently. The building is under correct oversight, she replied. Mark looked down for a moment, then back up, his expression no longer defensive, but uncertain in a quieter way. The environment itself no longer responded to his authority. Instead, it responded to verification. And in that realization, the lobby was no longer divided between staff and visitor, but between assumption and truth, and only one of those remained operational. The Meridian Tower lobby no longer felt like a place defined by movement or arrival. It had become a space defined by verification. Every screen, every access point, every quiet interaction between staff and system now operated under a different weight. Emily Parker watched as the final synchronization completed across all active terminals, each confirmation line locking into place with precise timestamps that left no room for interpretation. Thomas Whitmore stood slightly apart now, no longer acting as the central authority of the moment, but as someone observing authority being reassigned above him. Mark Reynolds remained near the security desk, his posture rigid but subdued, as if the structure he had relied on for certainty had been quietly rewritten beneath his feet. Alicia Carter had not raised her voice once since the shift began. She simply observed the space as it adjusted to her presence, becoming fully recognized rather than questioned. Emily finally spoke, her tone careful but clear. Executive oversight synchronization is complete across all building systems, she said. Security protocols, access control, and visitor classification are now aligned under ownership authority. Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing the operational reality. Then all active escalations must be routed through executive review, he said, more as confirmation than instruction. Alicia responded calmly. They already are. The statement was not a warning. It was an observation of process already in motion. Mark looked up slightly, as if trying to find something in the environment that still responded to him in the way it had before. So what happens to standard security procedures now? He asked, his voice quieter than earlier, lacking its previous certainty. Alicia turned toward him briefly. They remain, she said, but they are no longer the final authority. The distinction settled into the room with a clarity that required no further explanation. Emily's screen updated again, this time pulling in external system links from corporate oversight channels. A new notification banner appeared at the top of the interface. Executive audit initiated. She read it silently before speaking. Corporate governance has acknowledged on-site activation, she said. Thomas exhaled slowly. That means headquarters has been notified, he said. Emily nodded. They are already monitoring live system feeds. Daniel Brooks, still standing near the seating area, shifted slightly, his attention fixed now on the subtle transformation of structure rather than the people within it. So this is not just internal confirmation, he said. This is corporate-level visibility. Alicia replied without hesitation. It has been corporate-level visibility since the moment I arrived. The implications settled across the lobby like a quiet reset of expectation. Mark finally spoke again, though more cautiously now. No one informed frontline staff of immediate activation protocols, he said. Emily looked at him briefly. That is because frontline staff are not the initiating layer of executive activation, she replied. Her tone was not defensive, only factual. Thomas stepped forward slightly, addressing Alicia directly now. Do you require any immediate operational changes? He asked. Alicia considered the question for a moment before responding. No changes, she said. Only alignment. The word carried more weight than anything else said that morning. Alignment meant correction without disruption, structure without resistance, and authority without debate. Emily noticed another update appearing on her screen. A new classification had been assigned to all prior incident logs involving Alicia Carter's entry, misaligned access interpretation, pending executive resolution. She hesitated before reading it aloud. Mark glanced at her. What does that mean? He asked. Emily answered carefully. It means the system does not classify the events as violations anymore, she said. It classifies them as misinterpretations of authorization context. The lobby remained still. No one moved to respond immediately because there was no procedural response left that felt appropriate. Alicia finally spoke again, her voice steady and final in its tone. This is what correction looks like when it is done through structure instead of conflict, she said. And for the first time since the beginning of the encounter, the Meridian Tower lobby was no longer reacting to an event. It was adjusting to a truth that had already been confirmed. The Meridian Tower lobby had fully transitioned into a state of procedural calm that no longer resembled the uncertainty of moments before. Every terminal, every access panel, and every security checkpoint now operated under synchronized executive governance, and the building no longer responded to assumptions or hierarchy based on appearance or role alone. Emily Parker sat slightly straighter at her station, watching as system logs finalized their last round of corrections. Mark Reynolds stood near the security desk in silence, no longer issuing instructions, but observing instructions being rewritten above his level of control. Thomas Whitmore remained positioned near the center of the lobby, his attention divided between the physical space and the invisible administrative structure now guiding it. Alicia Carter stood where she had been throughout the entire escalation, unchanged in posture, her presence now no longer questioned by any system within the building. Emily broke the silence first, her voice steady but reflective. All prior escalation flags have been resolved under executive classification, she said. There are no remaining active security conflicts. Thomas nodded once, acknowledging the statement as confirmation rather than instruction. Then the building has stabilized under current governance parameters, he said. Mark shifted slightly, finally speaking after a long pause. So what happens to all prior enforcement actions that were triggered incorrectly? He asked. Emily checked the updated system feed before responding. They are being reprocessed as procedural misalignment events pending executive resolution review, she said. Alicia turned her attention briefly toward Mark. Nothing is being erased, she said calmly. Only redefined under accurate authority. The distinction landed without resistance, because resistance no longer had a procedural foundation to stand on. Daniel Brooks, who had remained near the seating area, slowly lowered his phone completely. I have never seen a correction process happen this fast at an operational level, he said quietly. Alicia replied without turning fully toward him. Correction is only slow when it is disputed. When it is verified, it is immediate. Emily noticed another update appearing across multiple system layers at once. Corporate oversight synchronization confirmed. External executive monitoring active. She hesitated before speaking again. Headquarters has acknowledged full live integration of ownership authority across Meridian Tower systems, she said. Thomas exhaled slowly, absorbing the implications. So there is no longer any ambiguity between local administration and corporate oversight, he said. Emily confirmed, there is no separation in authority structure at this time. Mark looked down at the floor briefly, then back up toward the security panel that no longer reflected his decision-making authority in the same way. Then what is my role now? He asked quietly. If decisions are no longer routed through security protocol as final authority? Alicia finally turned toward him directly. Your role remains unchanged in function, she said, but it now operates within verified boundaries instead of assumed ones. The answer did not remove his position, but it removed his certainty about how that position had previously been interpreted. Thomas stepped slightly forward again, addressing Alicia with a more formal tone than before. Do you require any further immediate administrative action from building management? He asked. Alicia paused briefly, as if confirming internal alignment before responding. No further action is required, she said. Only continued adherence to corrected protocol. Emily watched as the final system banner stabilized across all terminals, executive authority fully integrated. There were no flashing alerts, no warnings, no escalations remaining. Only confirmation. Daniel Brooks finally spoke again, his voice lower now. So this was never about confrontation, he said. Alicia responded evenly. It was never about confrontation. It was about recognition. And in that moment, the Meridian Tower lobby no longer felt like a site of conflict resolution. It felt like a system that had completed its adjustment to a truth that could no longer be misread. The Meridian Tower lobby had reached a level of stillness that no longer felt temporary. It was the kind of stillness that followed completion rather than anticipation, as if every system in the building had finally aligned with a single governing truth. Emily Parker remained seated at her terminal, watching the final audit streams complete their synchronization cycles without interruption. Mark Reynolds stood near the security desk, no longer attempting to interpret the situation through procedural authority, but instead observing how procedural authority itself had been redefined. Thomas Whitmore maintained his position near the center of the lobby, his posture composed, his attention fully adjusted to the new operational reality. Alicia Carter stood unchanged in presence, her role no longer interpreted, no longer questioned, and no longer filtered through assumptions. Emily spoke softly, her tone measured as she reviewed the final confirmation logs. All executive corrections have been finalized, she said. There are no unresolved escalation threads remaining in the system. Thomas nodded once, acknowledging the completeness of the process. Then the incident cycle is closed at the operational level, he said. Mark remained silent for several seconds before speaking carefully. What happens to the staff involved in the initial escalation protocols? He asked. Emily reviewed the updated governance feed before responding. All personnel actions taken during the misaligned access period are under executive review for proportional response assessment, she said. Alicia turned slightly toward the center of the room. No immediate conclusions are being made, she said. Only accurate records are being preserved. The distinction between judgment and documentation was now the defining structure of the environment. Daniel Brooks, who had been quietly observing from the side of the seating area, lowered his gaze from the screens to the people in front of him. It feels like the entire building is being recalibrated in real time, he said. Alicia responded evenly. It is not recalibration. It is restoration. Emily's terminal displayed the final synchronization message across all active systems. Full executive integration confirmed. External corporate governance alignment complete. No pending conflicts. She exhaled quietly, as if releasing tension she had been holding since the beginning of the encounter. Thomas looked toward Alicia again, his tone now fully formal. Is there any further directive from ownership that requires immediate execution? He asked. Alicia paused briefly before responding. Yes, she said. The room remained still. Even Mark straightened slightly, waiting. Alicia continued. Ensure that no future access determination is made based on visual assumption without system verification as primary validation. Thomas nodded immediately. Understood, he said. That directive will be enforced across all building entry protocols. Emily entered the instruction into the system without hesitation, and the update propagated instantly across all security layers. Mark looked down at the desk for a moment, then back toward Alicia. So every prior judgment call made today is effectively invalid under new protocol structure, he said carefully. Emily confirmed without emotion. They are reclassified as non-validated access interpretations pending review. Alicia's expression remained steady. They are not invalid, she corrected gently. They are corrected. The difference was subtle, but it redefined the entire framework of accountability within the building. Daniel Brooks finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before. So nothing was destroyed here, he said. Only redefined. Alicia responded. Structures do not need to be destroyed to be corrected. They need to be aligned. The final system status update appeared across every terminal simultaneously. Meridian Tower governance fully stabilized under executive authority. There were no alerts remaining, no unresolved flags, no active disputes. Only confirmation. Thomas stepped slightly back, as if acknowledging the completion of a process larger than his role. Emily closed her session window slowly, her expression calm but thoughtful. Mark remained still, no longer in opposition, no longer in control, but fully aware of the shift that had taken place. Alicia turned slightly toward the lobby one final time, her presence steady and unchanged. And in that final moment, the building was no longer a space of escalation or correction, but a fully aligned system operating under a single verified truth. The Meridian Tower lobby had fully transitioned into a state of controlled silence, not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence of completion. Every system indicator across the building confirmed what had already been established in practice, not theory. Authority was no longer distributed through assumption or interpretation. It was centralized, verified, and actively maintained through executive alignment. Emily Parker remained at her terminal, her hands resting calmly now that the final audit streams had stabilized. Mark Reynolds stood near the security desk without movement, no longer engaged in procedural defense, but instead observing the absence of procedural ambiguity. Thomas Whitmore maintained his position near the center of the lobby, his posture reflecting a professional acknowledgement that the operational hierarchy of the building had permanently shifted. Alicia Carter stood in the same position she had held since the beginning of the escalation, her presence no longer functioning as an anomaly in the system, but as the defining reference point of it. Emily finally spoke, her voice soft but definitive. All governance layers are now locked under executive authority. No pending overrides remain active. Thomas nodded once, absorbing the finality of the statement. Then the incident is fully resolved at all administrative levels, he said. Mark remained silent for a moment longer before speaking, his tone no longer defensive, but reflective. What does resolution mean for the decisions that were made before recognition was established? He asked. Emily checked the finalized audit summary before responding. All actions taken prior to system verification are recorded as misaligned procedural interpretations pending executive review classification, she said. Alicia turned slightly toward him. It means context replaces assumption, she said calmly. An assumption is no longer a valid operating condition. The distinction settled across the room with irreversible clarity. Daniel Brooks, who had been observing quietly from the seating area, finally lowered his phone completely and spoke without hesitation. I have seen systems correct errors before, he said, but I have never seen a system redefine authority while still operating without interruption. Alicia responded evenly. That is because most systems correct after failure. This one corrects through recognition. Emily's screen displayed the final corporate synchronization confirmation across all active channels. External governance alignment complete. Executive authority fully integrated. No remaining discrepancies. She exhaled slowly, as if only now realizing the full weight of what had just concluded. Thomas adjusted his stance slightly, addressing Alicia with formal clarity. Is there any further instruction required for post-incident protocol management? He asked. Alicia considered the question briefly before responding. Yes, she said. The room remained completely still. Even Mark lifted his gaze slightly in anticipation. Alicia continued. Ensure that future access control frameworks prioritize verified ownership data over visual classification at every entry point. Thomas nodded immediately. Understood. That will be implemented as permanent protocol revision, he said. Emily entered the directive into the system, and it propagated instantly across all operational layers of the building. Mark looked toward the security desk, then back toward Alicia. So every decision made earlier today is no longer active in practice, he said quietly. Emily confirmed without hesitation. They have been reclassified under historical procedural misalignment records. Alicia corrected gently. They have been corrected, not erased. The statement carried a final clarity that left no space for reinterpretation. Daniel Brooks stepped slightly forward, his voice calm but thoughtful. So nothing here ended in conflict, he said. Alicia replied. There was no conflict to end, only recognition to complete. The final system status appeared across every terminal in the lobby one last time. Meridian Tower fully aligned under executive governance structure. No active escalations. No unresolved authority conflicts. No system warnings. Only confirmation. Thomas took a small step back, as if acknowledging that his role now existed within a completed framework rather than an active dispute. Emily closed her terminal session with steady hands. Mark remained still, no longer positioned against the system, but within it, fully aware of how quickly perception had been replaced by verified structure. Alicia turned slightly toward the lobby one final time, her presence unchanged, but now fully integrated into the operational identity of the building itself. And in that final moment, the Meridian Tower was no longer a place where authority was questioned or assumed. It was a place where authority had been correctly recognized and permanently aligned.